Hi, and welcome to another episode of Malachi's Message podcast, Toxic Mold Sucks. I'm Elizabeth Kripe, co-founder and executive director of Malachi's Message. Co-hosting today is Emily Rochelle. She's our co-founder and board chair. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from Dr. Jenna Saxton. Dr. Jenna Saxton joined Dr. Offutt and the Heart and Soul Integrative Health Team in October of 2021. Born in San Antonio, Texas, but raised in North Carolina, she's excited to be back in Texas working with Dr. Offutt and optimizing patient care with an integrative and functional medicine approach. She received her undergraduate degree in chemistry from the UNCC and went on to pursue her degree in osteopathic medicine. She is passionate about applying her knowledge and skills as a doctor of osteopathic medicine to help fight illnesses, work with patients to set and achieve individualized health goals, and optimize health. That was a really long introduction, but it was so beautifully written. And I feel like it describes, in the brief communications we've had, it describes you so well. You're incredibly professional, but you're very personable. And there is just something that you can ask Emily when I first said, hey, there's Dr. Jenna Saxton, we're going to interview her. And there was just something that I feel like you just have such a beautiful soul in the interactions we've had. Like, you seem very sincere and genuine about patient care and helping people where they're at. So this is a privilege for us. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you. Like, it's really an honor for me to be here. So I thank you guys for that.
Dr. Saxton, Elizabeth has spoken very well of you. So I've been excited for this interview too, to also see you again, because we met briefly back in December. For our listeners though, that are out there wondering what osteopathic medicine is, could you kind of briefly explain what that is so they know what it is?
Yes. So osteopathic medicine. So a DO is a doctor of osteopathic medicine, and we are licensed physicians. So we're providers, and we have some kind of additional extra training and just an aim at really approaching patients as a whole, and treating the whole patient and not really just focusing on specific symptoms or systems, but just a more generalized approach, realizing that the body is interconnected. And one thing that really does set DOs apart from MDs is that we do have additional training in something called osteopathic manipulative medicine, which is oftentimes abbreviated as OMM. And that's where we get some extra special training on how to prevent illness through manipulation of joints, bones, muscles, nervous system, circulatory system, lymphatics, just a hands-on approach to being able to help the body in several different ways. It's not quite chiropractic care, but it is incorporating, there's HVLA, which is high velocity, low amplitude. There's myofascial therapy, there's trigger points. It's just kind of a musculoskeletal type approach, which is just another tool in the toolbox to be able to help patients with their chronic illness and prevention and healing, and just a really, really cool technique or techniques.
So I'm curious, how did you get into this field? I mean, a lot of people, you talk to them that are physicians, right? And they say, yeah, when I was a kid, I dressed up all the time as a doctor. So I'm assuming this isn't a type of thing where most kids are like, oh, I want to be a DO. So what made you transition from like an MD into this side of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always knew growing up that I wanted to do something in the medical field. That literally was, I think God just kind of dropped that in me because that's honestly the only place I could see myself. And growing up, I was heavily involved in the sport of gymnastics and was a pretty competitive gymnast. And I always felt like I was getting hurt, was always just trying to figure out how to prevent myself from getting hurt, trying to optimize just being an athlete by eating healthy, making sure I slept well, reducing stress. Like, I feel like very early on, I realized the importance of just lifestyle and how important that is. And like I mentioned, just always being hurt and how to go to the doctors and get x-rays. And I just wanted that knowledge to be able to help, well, one, myself when I was hurt and when I was, younger, but two, to be able to help other people. And just to have that knowledge, I thought was just an incredible gift to give back to people, to help them find what their problems were, and to be able to give them hope and healing. And when I was looking into, well, what do I want to do with my life? I did look at MD, I did look at DO, I looked at PA school, I looked at pharmacy, I looked at literally everything for a while. And just the mindset and what doctors of osteopathic medicine stand for and their training and the history just really kind of resonated with what I wanted to learn, what I wanted to be able to offer patients. And that's kind of how that happened.
One thing that I love so much about functional medicine is that, you are looking for the root cause, so that way you can cure the patient. And I learned, through our journey, because we were going to mainstream medical doctors, I didn't know much about functional medicine back then. Everyone just wanted to prescribe me something, and nobody could dig in and figure out what was going on, when, it was just mold that was causing all of our symptoms. And so, and what you do you see a lot of mold patients? And a good question that we were talking about earlier is, did you learn about mold when you were going through medical school? Because I found out from a lot of the medical doctors that I've spoken with, they were never even taught about it. Were you made aware of it when you were going through medical school? And then do you also treat mold patients?
So to answer the first question, no, was not taught about mold toxicity in medical school. It really wasn't something I learned about existed until I kind of entered into more integrative, holistic type medical practice, and got to see firsthand that yes, mold does exist, and it can profoundly impact patients and just, I wouldn't say destroy their life, but really debilitate them and be a struggle for them. And that there is hope and healing and helping them get better and getting back to, living life to the fullest. And I agree that for the most part, like with my traditional training, even though it was CO school training, those type of patients, I was kind of trained to just give medications for their symptoms and not really dig super deep. So I think a lot of times digging deeper to the root cause, whether you're an MD or a DO or a PA or whatever your training is, like a lot of times that does come from that individual provider having the desire to dig deeper. And a lot of that training and education, comes from them. But it's such a necessary world, and it's so satisfying to be able to help patients, one, identify their true root cause trigger, and to be able to go after it and see them get better. Like that is so fulfilling, and it's so much fun. And that is one thing that makes me just excited to go to work every day and work with patients. So, and then the second question was, how do I treat mold? Is that kind of the second question?
Yes.
So we do a lot of testing first off, testing to kind of identify what's the trigger, and if mold is, in their health bucket. And I'll kind of explain that because I tell that to all my patients. I think of how strong they are and how healthy they are as honestly a health bucket. And we all have different God-given size buckets, and we all have different things in that bucket. And we can all handle so much mold and so much tick-borne or virus or EMF frequencies or pesticides and herbicides. I mean, we all live in such a toxic world, and eventually your bucket's going to fill up and overflow. And that's when you get symptoms and autoimmune diseases or cancer down the road. And so like from my perspective, it's really trying to figure out, well, what's in that bucket and what can we remove from that bucket so that person's not overflowing and their immune system can help take care of things. And specifically with mold, a lot of times it's finding, well, what kind of mold is there, getting the patient on a specific binder to help bind and eliminate the mold. Getting out of the environment is huge. If you're still in that environment and you're so sensitive, it's just going to be continuing to fill that bucket up, even if you're taking scoops out with other detoxing modalities. But use a lot of herbals, a lot of binders, a lot of detox support. And there's, we kind of tailor protocols based off of that patient and their specific situation.
I love that you talked about total load. We've had conversations with people about that, and Emily and I have talked about this, and the reality that people oftentimes forget that it is a full picture. So you might have gone through mold, but your total load might have already been filled 3/4 of the way up, like you said, from many other factors that exist. And mold is just the thing that caused your body to go, okay, we're done. We're done. This is the topping it off. But I am curious, we've talked to a few people before about generationally seeing with things like EMF, seeing the toxic load just become, it's almost like it waters things down like a broth. And so each generation just gets a little bit weaker and weaker in their immune systems because of the different influences that create the full toxic load. Is that something that you're seeing? that you would tend to agree with, where because there are more factors involved now with our environment, that people's autoimmune systems are just decreasing almost generationally?
I think so. I really do. And I mean, there was a study, I wish I had it memorized, or I can find the link and send it to you, but it was just looking at how just even in today's day and age, an organic orange is not the same as an organic orange 100 years ago. And the nutrients there, and it's almost, I think it was saying you needed eight organic oranges today to be equivalent to one from 100 years ago, just with how the soil is so depleted. And, it's everything, the water we're drinking, the air we're breathing, the foods we're eating, they're just not, they're not conducive to keeping people healthy and supporting their immune system. And you can, there's definitely several measures you can do to help support that, but the traditional, standard American diet, the SAD diet, is definitely not something that's optimizing people's immune system to keep them healthy and safe long term.
Yeah. It's interesting. Emily, the other day, I sent her a picture. We had some friends over to grill in my family for our diet. We have this very specific farmer that we go to get our meat with our medical conditions. We have grass-fed, grass-finished. We know the butcher, like we know, the whole chain. And our friends were coming over. Our farmer had sold out of their steak, so we went and just got a commercial steak. And we put them next to each other in a pan. And Emily called me and she's like, what on earth am I looking at? Like there was such a stark difference between what came directly from the cow, just on good soil and grass, and what's been processed and turned out. And it just kind of blew my mind a little bit. And I'm going, man, if this is what most Americans are eating on a regular basis, this is not helping. Yeah. Like this is not, yeah.
I totally believe that your food can be a medicine and can help heal you and keep you healthy, or it can literally be a poison and can make you just inflamed and toxic. And I mean, even, there's so many people where if you just change their diet and take gluten out or take dyes out, the ADHD gets better. And it's, it's definitely work. It's not a quick pill that you can take and it'll fix things, but it's a lifestyle. And I don't think people realize how our lifestyle just goes against staying and being healthy. It's an uphill battle, and it takes a little work. So, but it's definitely possible.
Do you work with a lot of adults or mainly kiddos, or kind of both?
It's turned into both. So I definitely see, I think the youngest patient I ever had was like 3 months old. And then it ranges. I really see a huge range of patients. So some pediatrics, kids with mold, kids with pans and pandas, kids for just well checks. And then also all the way through to very elderly, we'll just say that.
I'm curious, what would you say is probably the hardest thing about what you do?
The hardest thing, that's a really good question. I think it's getting patients sometimes in that mindset that sometimes there is a little bit of trial and error involved with treatments, and that it can take time. I think people are just so used to having a quick fix. And when they realize like, oh, this might be a 6-month plus process and there is an investment and it's not covered by insurance, I feel like sometimes patients get really discouraged by that. And that can be tricky too, especially with like Lyme. When we treat some of the Lyme patients, one treatment does not work for everybody. Some people need just herbals. Some people need homeopathy. Some people need a combo of herbals and antibiotics. Some people need straight up antibiotics. Some people need SOT. And it's just, one thing does not work for everybody. Until you try it and give it a couple months, that's when you'll really, be able to tell if it's working or not. And I think that's hard for people sometimes to wrap their mind around that. Oh, I'm going to have to wait 3 more months on antibiotics to see if this is helping or whatnot. So I think I really do try to ingrain that in patients. Like, this is a journey. We're going to be friends. I'm going to be here to walk you through things. And then also to help them not give up too. Because a lot of times patients do get in a position where with the mold, especially, you open up a door that they didn't even know existed. And then they have to, they'll test their house with an ERMI and it's super high. And then they'll have to remediate their house or move. And like, that can be really hard for families, especially when they're finances are tight. And so I think working with families in that regard can sometimes be tricky. And I'm learning how to do that. But I'd say that's one of the harder things that I've run into with patients. Then for myself, I know one thing that's hard for me is also to be patient, because I want patients to feel better. And I think, just in the chronic mold Lyme world, it's sometimes you have ups and downs, that's just kind of expected. And that's hard for me sometimes with patients, because I want them to get better and just, have that magic wand to wave and help them feel better tomorrow, but that's not always the case. And sometimes you do get a little worse before you get better. So
I was talking to a mom yesterday, and she was letting me know that she's feeling better and her older daughter's feeling better, but then her other, daughter wasn't improving as much. And that has to be so hard. And I know, like with my son, Sebastian, it really took us a good year and a few months to really get him around a corner to where I had hoped he was going to actually recover, really recover to a point to where he would get his quality of life back. It's definitely a journey, and everybody's journey, I feel like, is specific and different from everybody else's based on how they were affected, and genetically too. And like you mentioned, their own toxic load bucket, how big or small it is.
yeah, absolutely. It's a journey. And then that's the thing too, is there's not just one set protocol for everybody. You really have to tailor it to that patient, and you have to learn that patient, which can take a little time to be able to create, an optimal protocol. And there's a lot involved and a lot to think about, that's for sure.
So you also specialize, when we were looking at you, you made me do some Google searches on things that I did not know about. But there are 3 other fields, or I guess specialties, that you have taken on. And I'm really curious, would you mind explaining just kind of what those are and how those impact your thought process, especially for people that have been impacted environmentally?
Yes. So I think the 3 were the genomics, which
Yes.
that's one. So genomics, that's an area that I really got introduced to and kind of dove into probably a year or 2 ago. And the main source that can I say companies on this interview? Intellect's DNA is the company that I've really got familiar with and had training in and utilize on patients. And it's through Dr. Cohen. She's in Austin, who's the kind of founder of that. But there's just several different panels that you can run that are very extensive to give a genetic analysis on that patient, which genes are not everything. There are genes that can be turned on. There are genes that can be turned off. I feel like sometimes patients get so focused on their genes and they think that that's their path, but there's so much more just genetics. I tell patients that it's typically about a 20% of, 20% is how much genetics are really playing a role with things. 80% is sleep, diet, stress, all those other things. But the genomics with Intellect's DNA has several panels that you can run and give you a really extensive, very informative overview of patients, which can show you, well, where do they struggle more? Do they struggle more with detoxing, or are they more prone to accumulating metals? Are they more prone to having celiacs down the road? So it can give you kind of a blueprint. And the thing with genetics is that they don't change. It's not like a food sensitivity test that can be different one year and then, the next year be totally different. It's something that is, how that patient is more predisposed to presenting or whatnot. And so some of the genetics can give you clues and ideas of where you got to focus more in for patients. And for example, hers is pretty cool because it'll give you a breakdown and say, well, what supplements will benefit this patient more than other supplements, or what anti-inflammatories are better versus these. And so you can really kind of tailor it to be very personalized, which can be very helpful. And some of the genetics can tell you, hey, you're a little red flag, you're a little bit more prone to developing cataracts in the future. So just be careful of this, this, and this. And so it can just give you some really good information that you can take with you throughout your life. And I really do, for like mold and for like the chronic tick-borne illness, hone in a lot on the mast cell section of the genomics and the detox. And then there are several panels that can tell you, like, if we're looking at that bucket analogy, genetically, what areas are more likely going to be more in your bucket, if that makes sense.
So are those tests that like real-time labs, right? You can order tests online. Are those tests that any individual person can just order and have done? Or is that something that someone's physician has to order?
Yeah, I think this Intellex one has to come through a provider.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. I do know that there are some that you don't need a provider, and I'm not very well educated in those other DNA testing companies. But this one that I use, I believe, just have to come through a provider.
Just curious.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're muted, Emily. You're muted.
I was watching you, Elizabeth, because I saw your little brain, or not your big brain working. Sorry. Because Elizabeth, unfortunately from her exposure, she did get mast cell, and she's had to figure out what's safe for her to take and not take. And so, did you ever do that test, Elizabeth?
I did one. I don't know which one it was. But it did show markers for that, and it showed my celiac and one other thing. But it's like Russian roulette. I just call it the food roulette, the medicine roulette, the environmental roulette when you have mast cell, because you never quite know what's gonna hit you and how long.
Mm-hmm.
And lemons, my body thought lemons were attacking it for 3 years, and all of a sudden in the last 6 months my body is totally fine with lemons. So I just roll with it, and I'm grateful that I'm at a point of maintenance and can choose to still do things with my life and not just be a victim to that autoimmune condition for the rest of my life. But it is really interesting. So yes, my brain was going.
A dog truly is a man's best friend. Canine Mastery knows this and believes in a dog's greatest potential. They are focused on quality, not quantity. The training methods used are based on traditional German training philosophies that have produced the best and most reliable dogs the world has ever seen. Canine Master focuses on developing the owner into a master of their dog while having fun and building an inseparable bond of love and loyalty that lasts a lifetime. Canine Mastery offers dog training and behavior modification, boarding, and doggy daycare. To learn more, please visit caninemastery.com.
So you're right, Emily, my brain was going.
I thought it was. I could see
it was going. Yeah.
Whenever you have patients that have gone through mold, do you find it common for them to be also diagnosed with an autoimmune disease or a neurological issue like ADD, autism, ADHD? And do you see, I guess, improvements or those diagnoses go away once they get better?
Mm-hmm. I definitely have seen that before, especially with like neuropsychiatric issues with Bartonella for sure. Like once we go after that, some of the neuropsychiatric or ADHD, those symptoms like clear up so wonderfully. And it's so great that these patients aren't going to be on just these different, prescription medications for the rest of their life to just support the symptoms. And definitely see that for sure as well with autoimmune diseases as well. And anytime anybody comes in with me for an autoimmune disease, this is just my personal belief, is I don't think God created our bodies just to start attacking itself. I don't think that was just how we were created. And I always think that there's an underlying trigger root cause as to why. And there have been several times where we've, found the root cause, helped support that, helped to eliminate it. And their titers definitely come down and they feel great, and they don't need the same support that they needed prior to, diagnosing and treating those issues. And oftentimes I will say it's not just one, at least from my practice, it's not just mold or it's not just Lyme. A lot of times it is a combination of several things, whether it's chronic underlying viruses, EBV, heavy metals, mold. We see a lot of tick-borne illnesses like Babesia, Bartonella, and Borrelia, which a lot of people still think that Lyme doesn't exist in Texas. And I see it so frequently. And I will say too, the patients that I have had that Lyme has reoccurred, they tend to have a mold burden that they didn't know existed. So whenever somebody comes back and they've been treated for Lyme and they got better, but then a year or two down the road, they're having symptoms again, like I immediately think there's something else in your bucket that's not allowing your immune system to keep things at bay. And I think every single patient I've had that has presented that way, we found mold and gone after that, and they're good right now. So yeah, it's very interesting how it's all interconnected.
I read this very well written story about this guy. I think he was a producer. He married like the first woman person on MTV or whatever. I don't know if you read the story. It's called, I believe, The Quiet House. And he moved into a moldy environment, but the Lyme that was dormant, and luckily he remembered he was bit by a tick when he was a boy, it got activated. And that's really what kind of tanked him, of course, because he had to treat the Lyme once he, removed himself from the mold. But, a lot of people, I think, don't remember if they were bit when they were little, and they don't realize that, it never became active. And then it becomes, like you said, there's a trigger there, it activates it. And like, I wasn't bit by a tick. Well, maybe you were, you just don't remember when you were a little one.
And I will say too, like ticks are not the only vector of some of these tick-borne illnesses. And yeah, they're called tick-borne illnesses, but fleas have been known to be a vector. There's maternal fetal transmission that can occur. So people can have other exposures versus just a tick. And you're right too, like a lot of times people don't even notice that they've been bitten. They don't get that acute bullseye rash. Like I had one patient who thought that she had a mole on the side of her head. She just was like, it just kind of appeared one day and was there for about a month and then disappeared. I think that, that she ended up having Lyme, and I think that was potentially her tick exposure. And so people, I think it's more common than people realize. And then just, it's not always a tick. So I think that's kind of important to realize. And the other thing is, they call some of the co-infections for Lyme, like Bartonella and Babesia, they call them co-infections, which I think is not a very accurate term to describe them, because I see them oftentimes occur by themselves, not with Lyme. So, and Bartonella can come from like cat scratch disease, like from cats. So there are other exposures too, versus just, ticks, fleas, maternal fetal cats. There's definitely exposures.
Yeah, that was a good point, because those other routes of exposures are, yes, people just don't realize that. I didn't. I was reading about it, but anyways, good point.
And I think I've even read, like over in Europe, they've identified Borrelia burgdorferi in mosquitoes, and they've never like proven that mosquitoes can transmit it to humans. But over there, they've identified that they can be in mosquitoes. And just in my mind, like if someone's bucket's already full and their immune system's out of whack, and I mean, I don't know how many mosquitoes they'd have to get bitten by, it's just, it makes sense. I think there's probably more ways than we realize that can be a transmission. And I mean, science and medicine is always growing and learning. And, there's probably more organisms that we haven't identified yet either. So there's always learning involved.
Sorry, I'm just picturing from my kids love the movie Lilo and Stitch, and there's a scene in there where all the mosquitoes attack one of the aliens, and that is just what I pictured when you said I don't know how many mosquitoes would need to bite somebody. I just pictured that scene in my head. Anyway, mom moment. Bioidentical hormone therapy. This was interesting to me. Would you mind explaining what that is to people?
Yes, absolutely. So bioidentical hormones, and we do a lot of this at our practice, is helping to support and optimize hormones using bioidentical. So it's the same structure and function as your body's natural hormones to help support. We do a lot of estrogen, testosterone, progesterone for patients that need it. Even just thyroid, trying to do the more natural route there. And so it's definitely not for everybody, but there are some people, especially people that are so toxic from different exposures, it does put you into a more sympathetic state, which is fight or flight. which is survival mode. It's not rest, digest, repair, heal, reproduce. And so, sorry. So, sorry, my dogs are going a little excited there. So what was I saying?
Rest, fight or flight, and then
Yes. So when patients are, and if you kind of think about it, it's so fascinating how God created us, you know, going back thousands of years ago, for humans, and a stressor for us, an acute stressor, really was survival. So it was, where's your next meal, running from a bear, being attacked by the next door tribe or whatnot. And that puts you into that fight or flight survival mode. And we don't have those same stressors today. You know, we can go to the grocery store and get meals. We're not going to be worried about walking home and having to be attacked by a bear or whatnot. But all of these stressors, such as chronic Lyme, chronic mold, all those things can still put you into that sympathetic state, which can dysregulate hormones and can cause you to be just more in that fight or flight, not rest, digest, repair, heal, reproduce. And so I do see hormones get off quite a bit. And so specifically with the bioidentical, it's more optimizing, you know, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone in those who need it, but it's also looking at their DHEA and their cortisol and their thyroid, because a lot of times I do see those get out of whack when they're under that chronic stress.
That's incredible. You have so far, I mean, you literally described such a holistic picture of repair for someone's body. Not once in this conversation has it just been, you know, well, if you are going through mold, you just need to take this one protocol and do this one detox. Everything that you've said has been such a beautiful picture of looking at every single piece of the puzzle of a person's body and working with that person, which for those of us, like Emily said, that went to doctor after doctor after doctor, and even honestly, some of us functional medicine doctors that just did, the first doctor we saw just did a single protocol that they said they did for everybody. And looking at it now going, man, what you're describing is what most people want. They want someone that's going to look at every aspect of their body, not just the one thing and the one symptom, and try and put a band-aid on it. So thank you for what you're doing, because it is genuinely helping people. And it's so fun to see, like, you light up when you talk about helping people, which is so fun. It's amazing. So thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, you're welcome. And it's crazy. I think this past last week, I think I had a patient that came in and they had been up to Mayo Clinic. They had been like across the country, different doctors. And I just remember thinking, like, sitting there, and they weren't finding answers. They weren't getting the help they needed, which is how they ended up in our office, which is oftentimes how it happens. But I just remember when they told me just all the providers they had been to, and of course they'd been to a cardiologist, and they had been to their nephrologist, and they had been to a neurologist, like all these individual specialties. And I just remember for a second just thinking, like, you've been to this many doctors in the Mayo Clinic, and you've applied to Stanford, and you're coming to see me. It's just kind of like, I sometimes have a hard time wrapping my mind around that, because this is such an integral part of medicine that's just lacking, and it's not being taught. And it really is sad, because it's so essential.
I really love that you do that test to check for people's sensitivities when it comes to supplements, you know, and you look at that, because I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people and they're just like, I just can't take this. I can't take this. My body reacts in a negative way. And so I didn't know that test actually existed till you mentioned it here. So I'm glad you did. I'm gonna tell everybody to go see you. That test.
Well, if people do want to know more about you, where can they go?
So I work at Heart and Soul Integrative Medicine in Marble Falls. That's where I'm at. So I believe the website's amyoffuttmd.com, and so you can go to the website. You can also call us or text us. I think the main number is 830-693-9355. And you can definitely get in touch with us there. Website's probably the easiest way to find information about us and what we do, and just generalized information. So
I feel like Jenna, we need to have you back on again.
I would love to come back.
Yeah, I feel like this was a great conversation.
I do too. Yeah, thank you for having me, and I'd be more than happy to come back whenever y'all would like. So definitely.
Thank you, Dr. Saxton. It seriously was a pleasure.
No, thank you.